Hello all, welcome to our new video tutorial, the staging area and the summarization. In the previous video, we discussed about the architecture of data warehouse where we have seen the definition of staging area. I want to make a special note before starting this session. We are taking example with a lot of numbers here. Request you to please make sure you understand those numbers properly. If needed, please watch the video multiple times. Let's first understand what is staging area. A few important things to discuss or understand in the concept of staging area are: what is staging area? Is the staging area different from actual data warehouse space? Is the structure of staging area different from data warehouse tables? What is the difference between data in the staging area and the data warehouse? Is the staging area mandatory for data warehouse? How and why is staging area required? These are all the questions which must be there in your mind. By the end of the video tutorial, you will have a thorough understanding on these concepts. We will discuss all these questions. Before that, let us talk about the concept of summarization. You must be thinking I am jumping from staging area to summarization, but don't worry, we'll come back to the staging area. Consider an example of a telecom company which started its operation in year 2000. We are currently in 2020. Name of the company is XYZ. Number of customers are 1 million. Average transactions per day per customer are 100. Total years for which the data needs to be stored in the data warehouse is 20. Taking above details in consideration, let's see how many records are being generated for the telecom company. So 1 million, that is total customers, into 100, that is average transactions per day, into 30, that's per month, into 12, that's per year, into 20, that's the total number of years we want to store the data. That is 1 million into 100 into 30 into 12 into 20. We are talking about a huge number. On top of that, please understand, we are just considering the transactions. We are not talking about the data or the size consumed for the details of customer, details of employees, and a lot of other factors. Now, it takes a huge amount of space to store this amount of data. Ideally, a company wishes to store all the data they generate, but to store all these records, they'll require a huge space, which in turn will require a lot of investment in purchasing the space. So there comes the compromise. Compromise to let go some unwanted data. But you also need to understand, the more minute level of data stored, the better is the analysis. Company needs to compromise as in the data which they wish to store. There are various ways or aspects in which compromise or reduction in data can be done. Few of them are listed below. First one, reduce the total number of years. In the previous slide, we have seen that the company is willing to store the data for 20 years. If they reduce the data and store the data only for 10 years, so the data itself becomes half. But is it a good idea? Reducing the total number of years may not be a good idea, as the company may need the data for more years to design a particular product or bring new plans in future. So reducing the total number of years from 20 to 10 may not be recommended. The second option is the summarization. Summarization of the total transactions. Summarization of total transactions, that is 100 in this case, which are the average transactions done per customer per day. Based on the analysis to be done in the future, it looks a better option. Now how can the summarization be done? Consider another example in the same XYZ organization. Consider we are in year 2001. That time also, on an average, the number of transactions generated per customer per day were 100. Out of those 100 transactions, consider one of the transaction that is done on date 1st January 2001, that is 12 AM. Again to repeat, consider a transaction done in year 2000 on 1st of January at 12 AM. We are standing in year 2020 and we are taking an example of the transaction which is done in year 2001. Now in year 2020, is this individual transaction of any use, or does that make any sense to analyze that particular record in the year 2020? Again to repeat, I am emphasizing only on this individual transaction. So for long-term perspective, I may not be interested in storing this individual transaction. So what we can do? we can summarize the data at a particular level so as to make that summarized data useful for analysis. This will also help in reducing the unwanted data to be stored in the data warehouse. Let's take another example. I can summarize the total transactions generated per customer per month, that is 100 transactions into 30, and make it single transaction or make it one record, which will also be the total bill generated for that particular customer for that particular month. Now I can store the total billed amount per month per customer, which will be useful for analysis in year 2020. I am repeating again, in place of storing the individual transactions, which will be around 3000, because the customer is making 100 such transactions per day, which will contribute to 3000 transactions. What we are trying to do is we are trying to summarize the total transactions done by customer every month and generate a single total bill. Now I can store the total billed amount per month per customer, which will be useful data for analysis in 2020. So if I do not save all the individual transactions for long term, but save only the total bill value for customer per month, I save a lot of space. Remove unwanted data and carry ahead the required data which can be used to analyze in future years. So my data reduces from this number to this number. This is just a sample example I took for explaining how summarization can be done. There are various ways or various level of summarizations which can be done. To repeat again, the customer is doing 100 such transactions. 30 are the number of days in a month. So 100 such transactions per month will contribute to generate the bill of the customer. What we have just discussed is the individual transactions, which are 100 into 30, that is 3000, may not be useful in year 2020. So we are summarizing the transactions, that is 100 into 30, to generate one bill. This is where we have reduced our data 3000 times. This is how the summarization can be implemented. So as you can see, the volume of data which is generated is drastically reduced to what we need to save now for analysis purpose. With this, I hope the concept of summarization is clear to you. Let's move to the staging area. In the previous example, we have discussed that we are generating a huge number of records. Out of this huge value, 1 million into 100 into 30, this number are the records generated per month. We are talking about the figure till this value. 1 million into 100 into 30. This is the number of records which are getting generated per month. Now, do I need to store this number of records for any specific use? Please hear the point again. Do we need to store this number of records for any specific use, at least for temporary purpose? Your answer should be yes. When we are saying yes, why do you want to store? To generate the bill of the customer per month. To generate the bill, we will need to store these many records at least for 1 month, so that the bill of the customer can be generated at the end of a month. Using these records only, the bill of the customer will be generated. This is where the staging area comes into picture. Again, going back to the concept of summarization, we just discussed that we can reduce the transactions by 3000 times and store only these number of records in our data warehouse. But the number of records getting generated per month are this, and only using these records my bill for that particular month will be generated. This is where the staging area comes into picture. We will create a temporary place where we will store these many records for at least 1 month. Once the bill is generated, I can summarize the data at the end of a month and load the summarized data into the data warehouse. This is a simple scenario where we need the staging area. So a staging area is a place where we store the transactional data for a small period of time depending on the business requirements, and then summarize the transactional data and load the data into the data warehouse. This is how we can utilize the staging area for business needs. Again, the individual transactions are loaded to staging area using the ETL tools or the SQL. As we have seen, the architecture of data warehouse, data is stored for a particular period of time. At this level, summarization happens and the summarized data is loaded into the data warehouse in batch process. In our example of telecom company XYZ, data is generated from mobile devices because the transactions are done from the mobile devices. Each and every recorded value is stored in the staging area from day 1 to day 30. At the end of a month, at the staging area, the bill is generated and the summarized data, which is the total bill amount, is loaded into the data warehouse. Let us go back to our previous slide where we have noted a few questions about staging area. I hope you should be able to answer those questions now. Let's take one point at a time. What is staging area? The answer is staging area is a common place where all the data is stored prior to being summarized and loaded into the data warehouse. Staging area stores the data in form of tables or in form of files. The count and the structure of tables in the staging area depends on the business requirements. Is the staging area different from actual data warehouse space? And is the structure of staging area different from the structure of data warehouse tables? The answer to the point 2 and 3 is yes. The staging area structure can be different from the data warehouse structure, or it can be same also. It depends upon how the design is done. Staging area can be in form of files also. There are some organizations which store the data only because of government regulations, and there are some companies which does enormous level of analysis in the staging area. So if a company is storing the data only for government regulations, they may not be interested in saving the data in staging area in a very proper format. But if a company is storing the data in staging area for some analysis purpose, they may be interested in storing the data in proper format in staging area. The fourth point, what is the difference in data in staging area and data warehouse? The data in staging area and the data in data warehouse is totally different, as the data in the staging area is transactional data, whereas the data in the data warehouse is summarized or analytical data. To repeat again, the data in the staging area is transactional data. That is where we will also refer staging area as OLTP systems and the data warehouse as OLAP systems. We'll talk about these concepts in the next video. The fifth point, is staging area mandatory in the data warehouse architecture? The answer to this question is no. The staging area is not mandatory. The staging area is optional. It can be present in the data warehouse or it may not be present. It again depends on the amount of data generated and the requirement of transactional data. The staging area will be created if a particular company needs to utilize the transactional data kept in the staging area. Please understand, you are adding staging area in the data warehouse architecture because you are not willing to or cannot store everything in the data warehouse because of the cost constraints. To enable proper storage in the data warehouse, we are creating this temporary storage which is called as staging area. How and why staging area is required? I hope by now the points are very clear. With this video, since we have learned the topic of summarization, I hope now you are clear with most of the aspects or most of the expectations from the data warehouse. Data should be integrated, that we have already seen. Summarization is a very important aspect. Historical data is another important point, and what if capabilities should be there in the data warehouse. In the next video, we'll talk about different type of tables present in the data warehouse. Thanks for watching.